The rope groaned like an old door in a storm as Sheriff Kane tightened the noose beneath the bandit's left ear. Noon light hammered the town square into hard glare. Dust swam in the air, turning every breath into grit. The gallows rose above it all like a wooden judgment, plank steps silvered by 100 boots. The trap stained a darker grain where men had kicked at the drop. Crows watched from the telegraph pole, beaks parted in the heat as if tasting the end before it came. Kane stood straight in his black hat and dust-worn duster, the silver badge on his chest bright as a shard of ice. His eyes, steel gray, unreadable, flicked once to the crowd. Ranch hands with hats in clenched fists. Women with shawls drawn tight despite the heat. A freckled boy on his father's shoulders, craning to see. The deputy, Ephraim Pike, leaned on the rail with a posture too relaxed for a hanging day, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The condemned man, Aureliano Ore Vos, wore trail dust like a second skin, blood crusted at his hairline. He was younger than the wanted posters had suggested, and older than his grin, the grin he aimed at Kane, even with the hemp kissing his jaw. "Ain't too late to settle," he rasped, voice rough as river stones. "There's more coin where that came from." Whispers rippled through the square. The bandits' saddlebags had come up heavy that morning, heavy enough to make the boards creak when Kane tossed them onto the jailhouse desk, heavy enough that, when he'd carried the pouch outside, the crowd had watched it, the way starving men watch a cook fire. The weight was still there on the platform, a leather belly cinched with rawhide, dark from a decade of hands. It sat on the plank rail like a tame animal that might suddenly bite. Kane didn't look at it. He tightened the rope with practiced fingers, then stepped back, jaw set. He could smell the sun-baked tar in the gallows posts, could hear the flies buzzing around the spit already drying at the base of the steps. His scar, faint line from jaw to neck, itched where sweat collected. The deputy cleared his throat, louder than he needed to. "Town of Calico Ford," Ephraim called, chest puffed, voice pitched for show. "By order of territorial court, sentence to be carried out by Sheriff Kane for the crimes of armed robbery, murder, and conspiracy. Any last words, Voss?" Voss turned his head toward Kane, eyes gleaming like wet coal. "Just to the law, man," he said. "You take a man's gold. You already made your choice. Hang me after. That's only housekeeping." A woman's gasp cut the heat. "He took his gold?" someone murmured. "Sheriff pocketed blood money," another voice hissed, sour with fear. At the edge of the crowd, a rancher's widow, Abril Cole, stared up with a stillness that hurt. "Whose law are you keeping, Kane?" she asked, not loud, but the square heard it all the same. Kane's face did not change. Inside, a wind like winter ran along his ribs. He had taken the pouch, true. He had set it on his desk, with the arrests ledger and the iron key ring. True. He had buckled his hand around its throat-tight mouth, because evidence had a way of sprouting legs when left loose in this town. Also true. But truth wore different coats, depending on who looked at it. To the crowd, coin on a lawman's desk smelled like sin. He spun his badge once between thumb and forefinger, the way he did when thoughts tried to run too fast. Sunlight flashed along the spinning star, spilled into the pits cut by years of fingers. His Colt .45, pearl grip dulled with dust, tugged at his hip. The gallows creaked. A fly landed on his knuckle. He didn't flick it away. "Price of justice don't come in coin," he said, voice flat as an anvil. "It comes in rope and witness." Then softer, only for the bandit to hear, "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." Voss laughed. and it was ugly. Justice? You don't know the word. Ask your deputy what he sold and to who. His boot heel tapped twice on the planks. A small nervous metronome. Sweat ran along his neck, darkened the noose. Ephraim Pike's smile tightened. He pushed off the rail. "Sheriff," he said, tone friendly enough to fool a stranger. "The town's ready. Folks are hungry for the dust to settle." His eyes darted to the pouch, then back, quick as a lizard's tongue. A hot wind came down the street, carrying the stink of horse and lye soap and fear. It lifted the hem of Kane's coat and ran ghost fingers through the crowd. The freckled boy whispered, "Is he scared, Pa?" And his father said too loudly, "Hush now." Kane stepped to the lever. He could feel the weight of the day in his joints, the weight of the town on his shoulders, and the other weight, leather, stamped with a faint military crest, pressing against the corner post where he'd hung it not too near, not too far. Coins talk. They tell lies faster than men. They buy silence from the greedy and truth from the desperate. He had not decided, not truly, what to do with them, only that for this hour they would not vanish into the deputy's nimble hands. Voss leaned toward him as far as the rope allowed, breath sour with last night whiskey. "Heard about your wife and boy," he whispered, and something mean danced in his eyes. "Men talk, Sheriff. Bad things happen when a man pretends he's God." A sound left Kane's throat that wasn't quite a word. The crowd hushed without being told. Above them all, a vulture cut a slow circle against a white sky. "Sheriff," Abril Cole called, voice steady as fence wire, "be a man we can follow." This was the part where he remembered all the roads that led him here. A father shot in a ditch by laughing men, a black hat he put on at 16 when drifting seemed better than stopping, a silver badge he didn't want and could not give back, a house that had gone cold in a single night and never warmed again. He let the breath out slow. His fingers curled around the lever. Time moved strange. The hemp fibers rasped. The trap thumped. Gravity seized Voss with a lover's certainty. He dropped clean. The rope snapped taut. The body jerked. Noise burst from the square like a kicked hive. Cries, curses, the hollow clatter of somebody's dropped tin cup. The freckled boy's father covered the boy's eyes too late. Kane didn't flinch. He watched the body settle, the boot's small arc slowing until the swinging became a sigh. He counted without moving his lips. 10, 11, 12. Long enough to be sure. When he turned, the deputy was already there, hand resting on the pouch like it had always belonged to him. "I'll book that as town evidence," Ephraim said for the crowd, voice warm with helpfulness. He lifted the leather and bounced it in his palm twice. "Feels light, Sheriff." Something cold slid down Kane's spine. He took the pouch back without raising his voice. The rawhide bit his skin. "You book nothing without my say," he told the deputy, eyes not leaving Ephraim's smile. "You want to help? Make sure the knot gets cut and the body washed." The words were plain work words, but they landed like stones. A single coin, jarred loose in the tug-of-war, rolled along the plank and circled the trap's edge with a bright, foolish ring. It flashed once in a shaft of white sun and came to rest against Kane's boot. He bent, picked it up with 2 fingers. Not a town coin. Too crisp. Too new. Stamped with a federal mark he knew from payroll escorts and war years. U.S. Eagle flanked by chevrons. Army money, government pay. The crowd didn't see what he saw. Not yet. They saw only a sheriff with a coin in his hand and a dead man at his feet. Murmurs shook the air. "Executioner," someone spat. "Took his gold, hung him anyway." A stone clacked against the gallows post, thrown soft and guilty by somebody who didn't want to be seen. Kane slid the coin into the pouch, drew the rawhide tight, and slung it over his shoulder where a rifle might ride. He looked past the faces and dust and whispering mouths to the abandoned courthouse facing the square. A sun-faded thing with busted shutters and a dead clock. The gallows shadow touched its steps like a pointing finger. Law and justice had once shaken hands inside that building. Maybe they still could, if he forced them to. Ephraim leaned close enough that only Kane could hear. "You hang a man with one hand and keep his wages with the other," he said, breath sour-sweet with peppermint. "Town's gonna wonder which hand they ought to cut off first." Kane's gaze didn't shift. "You worried about my hands, deputy," he murmured, "or about what that coin can buy in daylight?" A pulse jumped in Ephraim's cheek. "Careful," he said, still smiling. "Careful you don't pull a lever under your own boots." From the rope above them, Voss's dead weight turned, and the face, eyes gone to glass, mouth slack, seemed to watch the living with a smugness it hadn't earned. On the bandit's tongue, dark against the gray, a smear of dust clung like a last, filthy word. Kane stepped to the rail and let the town see him full. "I took the gold as evidence," he said. "It'll answer questions you ain't yet brave enough to ask." He paused, felt the wind lift and drop the tails of his coat. "And there will be questions." "Such as?" Abril Cole asked. Her grief sat beside her like an old friend. She did not hide it. Kane glanced at the coin mark cut into his mind. Where a drifter like Voss learned to rob federal payrolls, who told him where they rode, who counted shares that weren't theirs. He let his eyes find Ephraim Pike and rest there, expression mild, who wears a badge and talks to wolves. The deputy's smile didn't break, not quite. A long, low thunder rolled somewhere far off where the land heaved into blue hills. The rope creaked again, just once. Kane reached for his knife to cut the knot, and stopped. He remembered the other words Voss had breathed up against the noose while the crowd held theirs. "Ask your deputy what he sold and to who." He looked at the silver badge in his palm, felt its edges bite. Then he set it spinning again, a small star turning in a hard noon, and listened to the town go quiet, each soul leaning forward without knowing it. Hours earlier, in the sweat-stink cell with the bandit's wrists in irons and the gold between them like a loaded pistol, a different choice had been set on the table. And that, how a lawman takes a man's gold and decides what hangs afterward, was where the rope truly began. Dawn had not yet burned the frost off the mesquite when Kane ran the bandit to ground. The outlaw's horse had bled out under him in a dry arroyo, leaving a smeared trail of iron red across white sand. Cactus needles glittered with cold dew. A single vulture rode the pale sky like a black nail hammered into heaven. Aureliano Ore Voss came up on one knee, gun wavering, breath ragged. Kane didn't draw. He kept walking, boots rasping on gravel, coat hem whispering like a prayer. His steel-gray eyes measured the distance from Voss's muzzle to the way his wrist trembled. "Don't," Kane said, voice low as a church floor. Voss fired anyway. The shot went wide, a whine off rock and air. Kane moved once, fast, and the Colt's pearl grip flashed before he put a slug through the outlaw's collarbone. Voss collapsed against the arroyo wall, dirt and pain in his teeth. Blood ran down, bright as sunrise. He tried a smile that showed too much gum. "Reckon you ain't here to talk." "Reckon I am." Kane kicked his pistol away, then cinched shackles, iron cold on raw skin. A dust devil uncoiled and died 10 yards off. He heaved Voss to his feet and started the long walk toward town, crows following like black thoughts. By the time they reached the jail, the light had thickened to honey. The stove threw soft heat, and fly buzz hung in the air like a lazy saw. Kane set Voss on the bench, locked the irons through the ring bolt, sunk into the floor. The outlaw's face had gone the color of old paper. Sweat cut tracks through the dust. Deputy Ephraim Pike stepped from the back room, smile polished and empty. "You run him hard, Sheriff. Looks half dead already." His eyes slid past Voss to the bulging saddlebags slumped beside the door, lingered there, then flicked up again as if nothing had happened. "Want I should fetch Doc?" Kane didn't look up. He slid the saddlebags onto his desk and undid the rawhide ties. A leather pouch dropped into his palm with a satisfying, sinful thud. He loosened its throat. Coins flashed. Too clean, too crisp for trail money. Eagles stamped so sharp they bit light. He felt Ephraim's stare like a draft. "Fetch the doc," Kane said, tying the pouch shut. "And coffee." Ephraim went slow, as if his boots had found new weight. When the door closed behind him, the jail fell into the quiet of a well. Lantern glow slicked Kane's scar and made a polished halo on the dome of the iron key ring. He carried the pouch to the cell, set it on the stool opposite Voss, and sat, elbows on knees, badge held loose between thumb and forefinger. He spun it once, the silver star turning in the lamplight like a small, hard truth. Voss watched the spin, then the badge, then Kane. "Man could buy daylight with that sack," he rasped. "Buy 2 new names and a life that don't remember this one." "A man could buy a hole, too," Kane said, "if he deals with fools." Voss shifted, bit off a groan. "I ain't offering you a fool's bargain. I'm offering you a choice, Sheriff. You take that gold, you walk me to the edge of town, and forget my footprints. In return, you get more. There's a stash in the old courthouse, floorboard under the judge's bench. I seeded it there when the heat came up. Enough to buy this territory twice. Or you don't take it, and we hang at noon, and all that weight gets swallowed by coyotes and men with faster hands than yours. Seems a shame. Your coin's a confession," Kane said, tapping the pouch. "Federal eagles fresh as spring. That ain't stage money. That's payroll money. Somebody opened the route for you." Voss's laugh was a dry twitch. "Routes don't open by themselves. Takes a key. Keys wear badges." He leaned forward, chain clinking. "Ask your deputy where he drinks on Tuesdays. Ask who buys him peppermint sticks and news about wagons." Kane's gaze didn't move. "Names." Voss shook his head slow. "I name him, and I got a slit throat before daybreak. The kind of men behind him don't leave witnesses upright." His eyes found the pouch again, hunger and calculation nesting there like snakes. "You take the gold, we both live long enough to choose our ends." Kane set the badge, spinning again. The sheriff saw a dozen suns caught in the facets, all of them showing him versions of himself he had no stomach for. His hand stilled the star. "You think you're buying me," he said. "I'm buying time," Voss whispered, "and you're buying the truth. Listen, those coins came off a convoy that never should have been hit. We rode to the spot like we'd been invited. Nobody rides that close without a map. There's a hand in your office drawing maps." He lifted his shackled wrists, rope burns raw and angry. "You want my last word? Easy. Don't let Ephraim Pike log that evidence. You'll never see it again." At the name, something flickered under Kane's ribs. Not surprise exactly, but the satisfaction of a puzzle piece clicking home where his instincts had already drawn the shape. He didn't give the satisfaction back. "You got a family?" he asked. Voss blinked. "What kind of game?" "Anybody who'll lay you in dirt if I don't. Anybody who ought to have $1 laid on their tongue to pay the ferryman?" Voss's throat moved. "There's a girl at Nettie's boarding house. Not mine by blood, by bad years. She runs the wash and keeps to her corner. If there's $1 what ain't thief's, she can make it honest." He swallowed again, the motion painful. "You ask why I took to roads? Because the roads were the only ones that didn't turn their backs first. That's the truth you ain't buying." Kane nodded once as if to himself. He untied the pouch, pinched out a single coin, held it to the lantern. The eagle gleamed, crisp lines biting his skin. He ran the edge across his thumb until it raised a bright bead of blood. He pressed the coin to Voss's cuffed hands, leaving a smear. "Evidence," he said. "Stains easy, tells the truth when men don't." Voss's mouth crooked. "You ain't as cold as you look." Kane put the coin back and relaced the pouch with a double-hitched knot only he used, a sailor's trick learned when the cavalry still owned his mornings. He weighed the leather in his palm, then stood and carried it back to the desk, where the whole town could see it when they came to stare. His decision lay between his boots and his soul like a line drawn in the dust. "You'll hang," he said, voice even. "Law's the road we walk in daylight. I don't step off it for a man who sets fires in sleeping towns." Voss exhaled through his teeth, a hiss that might have been laughter, or the start of a prayer. "Then you ain't listening to the part where your daylight's bought and sold. You hang me and the men with clean hands keep eating. You walk me out under stars and I lead you to the nest where your deputy warms his feet." Kane's scar tugged when he frowned. He thought of a house gone cold in one night, of small boots by a door that would never be worn again, of justice, blind and honest, and law, which had learned men's tricks. His fingers found the badge. It spun, stopped. "Law ain't always justice," he said, and the words darkened the air like a cloud. "But justice rides with me." "You mean that?" Voss's eyes had gone soft around the edges, like a man who has found a spring in a mean country. Kane didn't answer. He reached under the desk for a ledger and inked a mark only he would recognize on the underside of the pouch's flap. A crescent, faint as a fingernail moon. Then set the leather belly atop the blotter, close enough to tempt a magpie. He unhooked the jail keys and slid one into his vest. The rest he hung on the wall, plain, bright, promising. "Doc'll be here," he said. "You'll live until noon." Voss watched him move. Measuring, always measuring. A man who'd survived this long by keeping words for when bullets were useless. He licked cracked lips. "If I swing, I swing. But hear this. The map seller meets in the back of Shorty Lee's saloon when the mirror goes black. 2 candles in the same window means the route got sold for Friday. That's tonight." He dipped his head toward the pouch. "If that walks before noon, you'll know exactly whose boots did the walking." The door opened, and cold morning poured in with Ephraim Pike, peppermint on his breath, and church boy cheer in his tone. "Doc's riding," he announced. His gaze went straight to the desk. He smiled with his teeth, not his eyes. "Heavy sack for an empty stomach, Sheriff. One I should book it proper. Folks get antsy if they think gold grows legs." Kane leaned his hip against the desk, easy as Sunday. You'll book what I tell you to book." He let his hand rest near the pouch, casual, like a gambler who knows the decks stacked his way. "Bring water for the prisoner." Ephraim's jaw worked once, a small grind of teeth. "Sure thing." He lingered. "You hear the talk? Men at the pump say the Gallows is hungry. Hard to argue with scripture when rope's cheap." He tipped 2 fingers to the brim of his hat and swung away, boots ticking the plank floor. When the latch clicked, Voss laughed, raw and short. "He's going to lift it," he whispered. "He can't help himself. A man like that's a pocket with hands." Kane picked up the coffee pot, found it empty, set it down again. He tasted the moment, sand dry and balanced. Out on Main Street, a wagon rattled past, children shouting, a widow's broom scritching across steps. He looked at the pouch and saw not gold, but a mirror. In it, a badge spun. In it, a rope swayed. In it, a deputy's smile cracked like thin ice. "Midnight," Voss said, eyes bright with fever and something meaner. "Behind Shorty's, when the mirror goes black." Kane stepped to the door and thumbed the bolt. The street's light thinned around him. He could smell rain far off where the hills kept their secrets. He took one last look at the outlaw. Iron on bone, sweat shining like oil. Then at the pouch, fat with answers. The knob turned from the other side before he could move. The door pushed inward. Ephraim stood there again, not alone this time. Beside him, a man in a preacher's coat, with city soft hands, and a folded paper bearing a territorial seal. Ephraim's eyes glittered. "Sheriff," he drawled, "there's been a development. Judge's order about evidence custody." The preacher smiled too much. Ephraim's fingers were already stretching toward the leather belly on the desk. Kane did not reach for the pouch. He reached for his badge and let it spin. The saloon wore the afternoon like a tired coat. Thin light slanted through the bat wings, turning dust motes to slow drifting cinders above the card tables. A piano thumped something half-remembered, then gave up. Sheriff Kane stepped in and every conversation ducked its head. Spittoons went still. His silver badge caught a pale lick of sun and threw it across the cracked mirror behind the bar, where his own scar traced a white hook along his jaw. He didn't bother with a chair. He set his hat on the counter, laid 2 fingers on the whiskey bottle, and waited while the room filled the silence with things men say when they're afraid. Bribe, blood gold, rope wisher. Folks didn't whisper well in Cedar Ridge, not when the Gallows still cast its shadow clear across the street. Bain the barkeep, a hard man gone soft around the middle, slid a glass along the wood. "On the house, Sheriff." Kane let the badge spin between thumb and forefinger, a slow, silver coin of law catching light, throwing it back. "On the county," he corrected, and didn't drink. Behind him, chairs rasped, cards slapped. A pair of mules stomped outside like the town had a pulse after all. He felt the looks on him the way a man feels heat at his back. Too close, too necessary. Voices came in snatches. Saw him take it, heavy as sin. Bandit begged on the scaffold, said the gold weren't his. Marshal might ride in, hang the sheriff who hangs for coin. Kane's jaw worked once. "Let it out," he said, not turning. His voice rode low and even, the tone a man uses to gentle, skittish stalk or start a brush fire. Bain wet his lips. "Folks are saying you took a satchel from Cole Maddox before you strung him, saying that's why you hurried the drop." He set the rag down like it was evidence, saying maybe the badge shines brighter when greased. Folks forget it was evidence. Kane's gray eyes cut to the mirror. and swept the room without moving his boots. Maddox robbed the Butterfield stage. Men died. That gold answers for them. Answers to who? From a table near the stove, a merchant with nervous fingers and a clean collar. Because rumor says those coins were bound for the railroad payroll, and rumor says the railroad answers to Judge Pike, not the people. A single coin clinked across the counter. Bain had palmed it up from somewhere, then set it on its edge to spin. The room watched it whirl. When it settled, the stamp showed, a spread-wing eagle, and below it, tiny letters burned into the face. CNNRR Railroad coin. Kane picked it up. It was warm from the barkeep's hand, smooth as a lie, worn thin. "Where'd you get this?" Bain's eyes flicked past Kane's shoulder to the corner table, where a woman in a velvet dress dealt faro for 3 freight hands and 1 quiet stranger. The woman's hair was piled high to show her throat. A red ribbon, snug as a promise, circled it. "Maddox's girl's been seedin' him," Bon murmured. "Name's Lita. Came in from Garrison the day after the hanging. Says she wants to drink the town dry of tears." Kane left the whiskey untouched and crossed the floor. Floorboards creaked like tired bones. The freight hands let their cards droop when his shadow fell across the felt. "That chair taken?" Kane asked. Lita didn't flinch. Her eyes were smoke hazel, her smile all brass. "It is now." She scooped the cards, hands quick, practiced. "You hunt men, Sheriff. I hunt luck. Luck's cheaper to feed." He set the railroad coin between them. "You pass these. That one landed in my tray an hour ago. This town sweats gold out its skin, far as I can tell." She angled her chin toward the window where the gallows frame cut the sky into hard angles. "You swing the poor and drink with the rich and call it even. You were with Cole Maddox?" "Sometimes." Her smile thinned. A pulse beat just under the ribbon at her throat. "He wasn't the monster you made from him." Maddox cut a stage guard across the belly and left him to watch himself die. "You preach law. I heard a plea. Sheriff," he said up there, "that sack ain't payment. It's proof." He claimed that gold wasn't stolen off a stage at all, that it came out of town hands, clean as church. Said he took it back from the men who bought his rope. She leaned in, voice a hush only his ears could catch. "He named your deputy." Kane didn't blink. "Which one?" "The one who never sweats," she said, eyes tilting toward the far end of the bar. Deputy Luther Voss stood alone, jacket neat, boots polished like carved stone, glass of milk sitting white among the whiskeys like a dare. Voss's expression was a coin face, a stamped likeness of concern that never changed. He didn't look over. He didn't need to know he was being watched to act like he was. "Cole Maddox named a judge, too," Lita added. "Pike." She made that one a whisper, like raw wind slipping under a door. Said the payroll was fiction. Said Judge Pike salted town with railroad coin to buy votes and fences and a rope if he needed it. Said you knew. Kane's thumb found the badge and set it spinning again. The saloon's reflected lamplight traced a bright wheel in the mirror, law circling and never stopping to touch down. "Law ain't always justice," he said softly, mostly to himself, that old sentence like a thorn in his throat. "But justice rides with me." "Does it?" Lita's eyes searched his face, reading the chiseled exhaustion there. "Or does it ride with coin?" The quiet stranger at the far end of the table turned his cards over one by one, a patient parade of losing hands. He'd been listening without listening, his hat pulled low enough to keep his intentions inside. Now he spoke, voice steady, Eastern vowels rubbed by trail dust. Judge Ezra Pike holds court in the freight office 2 doors down, keeps a private ledger in the back room. Men who pay in coin for verdicts who sign with their left hand, so they can swear with their right. He lifted his hat just enough to show the pale line of a scar at his temple. Name's Mercer. I used to count Pike's ballots until I caught him counting my share twice. Why tell me? Kane asked. Because I want out of hell, and I figure you're the devil most likely to burn him first. Chairs scraped. Voss drifted from his post like a shadow, deciding to be a man. He came to stand just behind Kane's left shoulder, proper, close, polite. "Sheriff," he said, voice mild. "A word?" Kane's fingertips brushed the pearl on his colt, hummingbird light, a habit as old as grief. "A word can wait. Not this one." Voss's smile was carved neat. "Territorial marshals on the noon train. He's bringing a warrant. Theft of evidence. Name on it reads, Ezekiel Kane." The saloon exhaled. A woman at a corner table laughed too loud, then clapped a hand over her mouth as if the sound were against the law. Kane turned slow enough to let fools talk themselves brave. "You serving rumor or summons, Luther?" "Just being courteous." Voss's eye flicked to Leda, then to Mercer, then back to the badge. "You shouldn't be in here, Sheriff. Judge Pike would prefer you meet the marshal at the jailhouse. Spare the town another spectacle." His hand settled atop the polished milk glass like he might drink it. He didn't. He let it sit, emblem white, clean as his shirt front. "Much obliged if you'd take his advice." Across the street, the big clock at the freight depot tolled once. It sounded like iron dropped into a well. Kane could feel the town listening to him breathe. He raised the railroad coin to the light again and saw a hairline groove cut into the edge. A thief's mark, the kind men use to split gold out a coin with a patient blade and sell the shavings quiet. He rolled it across his knuckles and let it ring on the felt. Gallows cost lumber. Juries cost ink. Rope don't come free. His voice was dry as fence wire in August. "I took that satchel as evidence. It bought me an hour with a man who begged me to hear names I'd already heard whispered. Sometimes you bait bigger fish with blood." "Is that what you call it?" Lita asked. "Bait?" He looked at her, gray eyes flat as creek slate. "I call it the only road left." Mercer pushed back from the table. "Back room of Pike's office. Ledgers bound in black calf. There's a false bottom in the desk. 2 nails hold it proud a hair. 3 tugs, and it lifts." He hesitated. "There's a line in there with your name writ clean as scripture." Voss's smile never moved, but his fingers moved to the front of his jacket, where the little pocket watch slept that he checked, when he wanted you to remember time's a rope, too. "Sheriff," he murmured, "don't make me ask twice." Kane's gaze hit the mirror again. In it he saw the room how a man sees his own coffin lid, warped and inevitable, men with their hats brim low, women fixing their faces to the facts they preferred. His badge, a wheeling light, the Gallows crossbar printed across his shoulder like a brand. He picked up his hat. "I'm done askin'," he said. He moved first, not toward the door, not toward Voss, but toward the side hallway that led past the kitchen, through the alley, toward Pike's office. His duster brushed chair legs. The saloon rose and wavered like heat over a blacktop trail. Someone prayed. Someone cursed. Voss's boots fell in behind him with precise, even clicks. The alley stank of spilled beer and old coal smoke. He could see Pike's signboard beyond, steadying in the wind. Ezra Pike, magistrate, freight tariffs adjudicated, disputes settled. A clean promise on a dirty board. Last chance to be noble, Voss said behind him. Stand by the jail like a good lawman and meet your warrant with dignity. Kane paused with his palm on the freight office doorknob. The wood was warm from sun. He could hear paper within, pages turning, pens scratching, the money sound of ink buying absolution. He let the badge spin, a bright coin whirring to stillness in his palm. Law ain't always justice, he said, and the words came out iron. But justice rides with me. He turned the knob. Inside, Judge Pike sat at a desk too fine for the territory. Ledger open, pen lifted. He looked up with a smile that showed good dentistry and bad faith. "Sheriff Kane," he said, voice rich as molasses, "I was just writing your name." Kane stepped across the threshold and stopped. Pinned to the inside cover of the ledger with a neat brass tack was a folded document bearing the territorial seal. At the bottom, in Pike's elegant hand, ran a single line: Order of immediate suspension and seizure. Sheriff Ezekiel Kane, for misappropriation of gold. And beneath it, stamped with red wax, a second name glared up like a wound: Acting Sheriff Luther Voss. A pistol's hammer clicked behind Kane's ear. "Easy," Voss breathed, polite as prayer. "Hands where we can all admire 'em." The lamplight pooled on the black ledger, and the badge in Kane's palm stopped spinning. Outside, the noon train screamed. Inside, the page fluttered once in a draught, as if the law itself had taken a breath. Then everything held very, very still. Dust slanted through the jailhouse window in a golden tilt, turning the motes into slow, drifting ash. Sheriff Kane set his silver star on the desk, and beside it, the gut-heavy pouch he'd taken from Jasper Cole's boot just before the trapdoor dropped. The leather sweated the faint reek of chemicals. His fingers, scar-nicking jaw to neck, rested on the badge. He spun it once, let it tick down on the wood. Outside, the street murmured like a congregation waiting for a verdict. Folks said the sheriff took a bandit's gold and then hanged him anyway. Folks liked their stories simple and damning. Kane unknotted the pouch and spilled 20 double eagles into the afternoon. Coins rang bright as little bells, dimming to a sullen clink when the final one rolled and settled against the badge's edge. He lifted a coin. Its face was wrong. Not mint, something private and proud, a tiny pickaxe over letters he recognized from the freight crates that rolled through on moonless nights. K&B, Kingsley and Bragg, mining combine. The same K&B that paid wages late and buried cave-ins faster than they buried their dead. Boot heels clicked like poker chips. Judge Ephraim Beaumont entered without knocking, black coat combed by sunlight, a slow smile stapled to his face. Mayor Reed followed, hat in hand, eyes counting coins. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Beaumont drawled, voice like oiled rope. "Word is you found contraband on a condemned man. We'll relieve you of it for the court record." Kane let the badge spin again. The tiny star blinked with every turn. "You'll get it when I know why a mine's private mark sits on outlaw gold, Judge." "Evidence is fragile in the wrong hands," Beaumont said. "Hand it over." Kane stood, tall enough to cast Beaumont in shade. "Law says the sheriff holds exhibits until trial. Ain't but one man in this room wears that duty." A bead of sweat formed at the judge's temple despite the cool shade. Reed cleared his throat. "Folks are uneasy, Kane. You took gold, then you hanged Cole. Looks unseemly." Kane reached for the water glass, tasted dust and tin. "Looks ain't law." "Law," Beaumont said, lips thin. "Answers to the court. and the court answers to order. You'll give me that pouch. Kane let the demand hang. Then he pinched one coin in his palm, rubbed. Yellow streaked his skin, wet as bile. Sulfur? No, niter and quicksilver, the stink of a dirty retort. Someone was washing gold in a back room and stamping it with a king's smile. Order's been bought before, he said softly. Beaumont's eyes hardened. Careful you don't confuse justice with your private grief. Kane's gaze flicked unbidden to the empty chair by the stove. His boy used to clamber there, clapping when Kane cleaned the Colt 45. He pushed the ache back, like he'd done 1,000 nights. I don't confuse much anymore. They left with stiff backs and promises of writs. The murmurs outside followed them like a stray dog. Kane locked the door and poured the coins into his palm again. Under 2 gilded discs lay a small folded paper crackled thin by sweat. He opened it. A single name in a clerk's square hand, Tilda Ormsby, and a figure, $200, under it, or else. He pictured the dance hall girl with sawdust in her hair who'd pointed him to Cole's hide last week for the price of a warm meal. She'd gone missing 2 nights ago. God damn, he breathed, and the word wasn't a curse so much as a cracked prayer. The jailhouse door rattled. He drew the Colt, pearl grip cool in his palm. It wasn't Beaumont's bailiff. It was a woman in road grit and grief, shawl clamped tight despite the heat. She flung a bundle onto the desk. It hit like a small animal, soft, heavy, final. Jasper's pouch, she said. He sent me to fetch it, said it wasn't his, said he was carrying it for a man who promised our boy wouldn't end up in a graveyard without a name. Her voice trembled like a fence wire in wind. You took it and hanged him anyway. Kane kept the Colt low. Name? Lena Cole. Her jaw jutted like a dare. I ain't asking a favor. I'm asking for what belongs to my child. The town had spooled this exact scene in their heads. The widow, the gold, the sheriff weighed down by his own choices. He could hand the pouch over, buy himself a day of soft talk. Instead, he nudged the coin toward her with a finger. Let her see the K&B stamp, that crooked pickaxe like a crow's foot. Your man robbed the combine. Jasper couldn't plan his way out of an empty barn. She shot back. He carried what he was told, like you carry that badge. Her words landed, clean, mean, true. There's a ledger in here, Kane said, showing the paper with Tilda's name. If I follow it, I find who paid your husband to wear the rope. Maybe I find who took your boy's future and beat it into minted circles. She stared, breathing shallow. Some fight left her eyes, but not the bones. And if you don't follow it, you sleep clean, Sheriff. Kane swallowed grit. I don't sleep. He pressed 2 coins into her hand. For the boy. Not because Jasper earned it. Because a child didn't choose a damned thing. She looked at his palm, at the scar threading his neck. Much obliged, she whispered, as if the words hurt. When she'd gone, he felt the room tilt. The badge winked up from the desk, like a tiny moon. He nudged it, set it spinning. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. He set it to the empty chair, to the ghost that never answered, and knew he'd just bought himself more enemies than friends. By dusk, the saloon's piano had learned his name in minor keys. Whispers moved table to table, clinking with blue glass. Deputy Tully hadn't turned up for shift. The livery boy found him face down in a horse trough, with a slit behind the ear, clean as a butcher's line. Tilda Ormsby turned up next, not breathing, hidden where the freight road bent south under cottonwoods. Her hands were clean, Her mouth was not. Kane rode out to the cottonwoods with the moon hitching on clouds like a lantern behind a dirty glass. He crouched, breathed the ground. The prints weren't drunk or desperate. They were deliberate. 2 men, one heavy, one with a knee that dragged. The heavier wore a stacked heel, office leather, not a cowboy's boot. He followed the trail to the freight spur and found a powder burn kissed into the tie like a signature. Men who killed in the law's shadow always left a mark to admire. When he returned, the courthouse steps thrummed with voices. Beaumont stood at the top like a conductor, Reed beside him, hat twisting. A cluster of mine guards lounged nearby with smug rifles and company scrips peeking from their pockets. Beaumont held up a paper. "By authority of this bench, Sheriff, you'll surrender all evidence from the Cole execution, including the coin, the pouch, and any documents. Failure to comply is contempt." Kane mounted the steps, one slow plank at a time. The crowd made a tide that parted and closed again. Wind lifted grit in little devils around his boots. He held up a single double eagle between thumb and forefinger. "This ain't federal issue," he said, turning the coin so the pickaxe winked. "It's stamped in a mine that pays men in drink and buries them in debt. That stink on it, that's quicksilver. You wash dirt with poison when you're in a hurry to hide where the money came from." Beaumont's mouth thinned. "You overstep." "I step where the rope swings," Kane said. He made sure the whole town heard him. "Tilda Ormsby's dead. So's my deputy. Either that coin buys silence, or it buys crosses." A woman near the back crossed herself. A miner spat and missed his own boot. "I'll see that pouch, Sheriff," Beaumont said. "Now." Kane lifted the leather high. "You'll see it when you sign for it in my log and answer, under oath, why Company Gold paid an outlaw to deliver a warning." He dropped the pouch hard enough on the step to make the coins jump. The sound ran across the square like scattershot. "Ask yourselves," he said to the town, "who profits when a sheriff is called a thief and a witness turns up cut in the dark?" Silence pooled. Somewhere a dog barked and thought better of it. Beaumont leaned in, breath sweet as licorice. "You're finished, Kane. You just don't hear the hammer fall yet." Kane leaned back and smiled a sliver. "I hear it fine." He turned, walked back to the jail in the kind of quiet that is not safety, but coiled waiting. He set the pouch down on the desk and stared at it. The leather looked darker now, as if it had drunk everything it touched. He opened it one last time and found, under the last coin, a small thing that didn't belong. A tin soldier, cheap, bent at one metal knee. His boy had one just like it, used to march it across the floorboards while Kane counted beats with a spoon. But this one wore the same oily sheen as the coins. Someone had cast the toy from the mine's tainted wash, then tucked it where Kane would find it only when he'd gone too far to turn back. His throat closed. He reached without looking and spun the badge to keep his hands from shaking. The little star whirred and shivered to a stop, pointing due north. A knock came soft as a moth's wing. A messenger slid a folded writ under the door and fled down the boardwalk. Kane unfolded it. Warrant for the arrest of Sheriff Elias Kane. Charge: malfeasance, theft of evidence, obstruction. Signed, Judge Ephraim Beaumont. Execution of warrant at dawn. The tin soldier winked up from the desk beside the gold and the spinning star. Dawn suddenly felt like a noose tightening from 100 yards away. Outside, the gallows rope creaked in the night breeze as if remembering a neck. Who would hang at sunrise, Kane or the truth? Shorty Lee's saloon kept its promises to the dark. The mirror behind the bar was blacked with soot, and 2 candles burned in the same front window, their twin flames shivering like guilty thoughts. Outside, midnight wind dragged grit along the boardwalk. Inside, the piano slept with its mouth open, and the card tables waited like altars for men to lay down their luck. Kane slipped through the rear alley door, coat-grazing flour sacks, and an old barrel of lye. He tasted coal smoke, old beer, and the sour sweetness of peppermint that seemed to linger wherever Deputy Luther Voss had recently been. His badge lay cold against his palm. He spun it once, let the silver star blink and fall still. The heavy pouch rode high under his coat, the leather sweating that faint chemical stink he'd come to recognize. Mercer sat at a corner table, nursing a dead hand and a warm beer. Hat low, scar pale, eyes working. He didn't bother with hello. "Back room," he murmured. "Mirrors black. That's where they sell the Friday route." "Names," Kane said. "Kingsley's foreman, Harrow, Judge Beaumont's runner, Miles, and the deputy who never sweats." Mercer's mouth twitched toward a smile that had forgotten how. "You sure you don't want to leave that pouch with me?" Kane slid his gaze to the dark hallway, where lamplight died on warped pine. "I'm sure." Leta dealt faro for ghosts. Her ribboned throat tracked him, eyes a shade too still. As he passed, she reached, fast, caught his sleeve, left a tiny smear of red on the cloth. Not blood. Wax. The exact color of the candles in the window. "Careful," she whispered. "This night's got teeth." Behind the soot-black mirror, a door clicked. Kane moved along the wall, Colt loose at his hip. He pressed his ear to the panel and heard the shapes of men. A glass set down, a chair scraped, paper unfolding. Then Voss's voice, polite as a parlor. "Messa, gentlemen." Harrow had a foreman's rasp and a gambler's smile. "Deputy, Judge Beaumont sends his regards and his need. The North payroll leaves at dawn if you boys are feeling spry." "Feeling paid," Voss said. "I've kept your wagons safe. I've kept your enemies hung. I've kept the sheriff's boots stuck in his own shadow." "You kept your brother swinging," Harrow replied, and the chair legs creaked like bones. That part was almost art. Kane's hand stopped on the door latch. "Brother." Voss let a beat pass. When he spoke, his voice came smaller and colder. "Ori wanted to run soft. I told him the world's a hard place. Some men are rope, some are coin. He chose." In the hallway, Kane looked down at the tin soldier in his fist. The little knee bent as if mid-march. He remembered his boy counting steps on the kitchen floor, sunlight crawling up his boots. A laugh he could barely hold. He put the toy in his vest pocket, like a prayer you say with your teeth clenched. Miles spoke next, oily as courthouse ink. "Judge says the writ's ready for dawn. Misappropriation, malfeasance, obstruction. He signs, I carry, you arrest. Town wakes to a new order. Acting Sheriff Luther Voss." Paper crackled, wax cracked. All it takes is the pouch on his desk and a shout. "Don't trouble yourself," Voss said. He brought the pouch to me. Kane twisted the latch and stepped into the room. It smelled of lamp oil, cheap cologne, and metal burned too hot. The mirror swung inward to show a narrow office with a green baize table and a map of the territory shot through with pins. Harrow's hands were soft and clean and dirty all at once. Miles wore a preacher's coat to cover a wolf's heart. Voss stood with one thumb hooked inside his vest, the other hand laid easy on a milk glass, white as a lie. Kane set the heavy pouch on the table like a stone at a graveside. "Ori Voss," he said, just to feel the name sit where it belonged. "You let your brother hang to hide the trail to this room." Voss's eyes shone almost kindly. "Evenin', Sheriff." "Evenin'," Kane returned, flat as winter ground. Harrow moved his chair an inch, Boots whispering, "We doing business or we trading sermons?" Kane unknotted the rawhide. Coin's bell chimed, and then dulled as they spilled, bright eagles and the ugly pickaxe stamp of K&B winking up through lamplight. He pinched one, turned it. "This gold is a map," he said. "It tells me which hands touch it and how quick they wash. It smells like quicksilver and judgment." Miles reached for the pouch with 2 fingers, delicate, like a man picking up a snake he means to sell. "Evidence belongs to the court. Evidence belongs to the truth," Kane said. He flicked his gaze to Voss. "And the truth says you sold roots, sold lives, sold your own kin. Come morning, I'll ring the courthouse bell and read the ledger aloud in the square. We'll see how much the town can stomach." Voss's smile didn't move. Only his eyes. They hardened to the color of nail-heads. "You'll ring nothing." He nodded, almost apologetic. "Hands." Harrow and Miles didn't reach for the coins. They reached under the table. Steel cleared leather. Kane moved. The colt rose, barked once. The lamp blew out, filling the room with moving shadow and the hot stench of spilled oil. Muzzle flashes stitched blue-white commas in the dark. Someone cursed. Glass shattered. Lita screamed out front and then bit it back to nothing. Kane went low. A shot pinged the frame where his head had been and sang down the hall like a bad angel. He felt a splinter walk into his cheek. Another gun fired from the doorway. Mercer, steady as a carpenter's level. Harrow grunted and fell. Miles fired wild and hot. A bottle burst, and gin made the floor a slick promise. Voss didn't fire. Voss was a patient man. Kane found him by the peppermint, by the precise stillness a good killer wears. "You can walk out of here, Sheriff," Voss said, voice calm. "Drop the gun, put the pouch down, let the morning swallow the rest." "Law ain't always justice," Kane answered, rising with the colt like a verdict. "But justice rides with me." He stepped through smoke and grabbed Voss by the vest, slammed him against the wall, the black mirror shivering in its frame. He shoved iron cuffs out of his back pocket, old cavalry steel, tight as a promise, and snapped one bracelet over Voss's wrist. The deputy's breath left him in a surprised huff. For one heartbeat, Kane imagined how this could go. Haul him outside, ring the bell, answers given in daylight. Miles's pistol cracked. Mercer cried out, a wet sound, and went to one knee. Lita kicked the door with a boot heel, sending it into Miles's face, and the judge's runner went down, cussing blood onto his fancy coat. "Run," she hissed at Kane without looking. "They'll bring the whole 9-yard inside this room." Kane's grip tightened. He had Voss half shackled. One more click, and the law would hold. Behind him, boot thunder rolled up the alley. Many men hurried, confident, the sound of hired certainty. Voss lifted his free hand, slow and harmless as a prayer, and drove the milk glass against Kane's temple. White exploded to stars. Kane staggered. The cuff tore free of Voss's wrist. With a scream of metal and skin, Voss spun, drove his elbow into Kane's ribs, pivoted out of the half-dark like a dancer. He didn't go for his gun. He reached for the pouch. Kane fired. The bullet took the leather clean through. Gold vomited across the floor with a bright idiot rattling. Coins skittered under tables, under shoes. Men forgot they were brave and looked at money the way starving men look at a cook fire. For 3 seconds, the room belonged to greed instead of fear. Voss used all 3. By the time Kane cleared his head, Voss stood at the blackened mirror with Miles behind him and 6 mine guards stacking into the doorway, rifles up, faces empty. Beaumont's writ rode in Miles's bleeding hand like a holy book. Voss smoothed his sleeve where the cuff had chewed him and smiled, as if he'd forgiven the world for its clumsiness. "Ezekiel Kane," he said, courteous as church. "By order of Judge Ephraim Beaumont, you're under arrest." Behind him, Harrow lay still. Mercer knelt with his palm pressed to his side, teeth bared. Lita had a derringer in her garter and a dare in her smile, but her hand shook. Kane looked at the rifles, the writ, the room that smelled of oil and coin and willing sins. He could cut Voss down and choke the doorway with bodies. He could be the executioner they already named him, or he could keep the badge and be buried with it. His fingers found the tin soldier in his vest, the small bent knee cool as a river stone. He pictured a boy marching 12 paces that never reached a front door. He pictured a bell rope rough in his hand, a town hearing its own heartbeat out loud. He holstered the Colt. "Much obliged," Voss said softly, and a little pity lived in it. Badge on the table, hands where the town can admire him. Kane set the star on the baize. The silver looked small against the stained green. He lifted his hands shoulder high. The mine guards fanned out, rifles drawing tidy lines through the room. Miles dabbed at his nose with the writ and grinned pink. "Walk," Voss said. "We'll let the morning do the hanging." Kane took a step, 2, 3. Then he jerked left, slammed a shoulder into the wall, and shouldered through the black mirror with a roar of breaking glass. He hit the alley in a rain of silver and soot, boots sliding on spilled gin, and ran into air cold enough to bite his lungs. Bullets chewed the doorway as he cleared it. He dove behind the ash barrel. Shots clanged off iron. Across the street, the abandoned courthouse stood in moonwash like a bleached skull. Its dead clock pointed at nothing. Its bell rope hung through the broken window, a dark vein. "Kane," Voss shouted from the shattered hole, voice alive now, bright with the hunt. "You come back and take your medicine." Kane didn't answer. He sprinted. Boots hammered boards. The street opened its eyes and gasped. A dog barked itself brave. He took the courthouse steps 3 at a time and shouldered the door. Inside, dust rose like ghosts. The gallows yard beyond showed through cracked glass, rope stirring lazy in the night wind. He found the bell rope swinging, caught it, and pulled. The peal leapt out over Cedar Ridge with a voice older than judges, louder than coins. It rolled down the alleys and along the tracks to the depot. Men woke. Women lit lamps. Doors slapped open like cards fanned for a game no one wanted to play. On the 3rd toll, a bullet smashed stone by his ear. On the 4th, boots flooded the square. On the 5th, Voss stepped into the courthouse doorway with Beaumont's men haloed in lamplight and rifles steady. His sleeve cuff ragged, and a small bloom of blood on his wrist where the iron had kissed him. "Drop the rope," Voss called, calm again, "or I drop you." Kane held the rope 1 beat longer and felt the town's attention settle like a hand on his back. Then he let go. The bell's last note hung and thinned, and the hammer click of 12 rifles cocking took its place. Dawn, somewhere behind the hills, drew a knife across the sky. Dust blew along Maine like a warning, lifting skirts and whispering at boot tops as folks filed into the two-story courthouse with its peeling white paint and square bell that hadn't rung for mercy in years. Sheriff Kane climbed the steps slow, boot heels hitting the plank with the steady patience of a man who'd chosen the storm and meant to stand in it. He carried a scarred lockbox in his left hand and his silver badge in his right, turning it once between thumb and forefinger until the metal flashed cold. The Gallows stood across the street, black in the noonlight, a shadow drawn on the ground like a promise. Inside, heat and breath pressed close. The benches thrummed with gossip. Kane's deputy, Mercer, kept to the wall, hat pulled low, jaw tight. He didn't meet Kane's eye. You took coin from a condemned bandit the night before his hanging. I took evidence, Kane answered. He set the lockbox on the table and flipped it open. The smell of cold gun oil drifted up. The ledger he'd kept was there, black, tight handwritten, numbers he could prove. This is what we pulled from Hector Vale's saddlebag. 23 double eagles. He pointed at the pouch. And this tally proves it. Vale bought witnesses and bullets with stolen money. That coin's what tied the gang to 3 post runs and a murdered driver out by Bitter Wash. From the back pew, a leathered rancher muttered, "Coin spends the same no matter who it robbed." A couple men chuckled, the kind who hid nerves with noise. Kane heard a woman's prayer buzz up from the front row like a wasp. Croom smoothed his lapel. And yet, Sheriff, you hanged Vale at dawn. Swift justice, indeed, after he gave you gold at midnight. Pardon the curiosity. Why wasn't the pouch sealed in our office first light? Mercer shifted. Kane didn't look at him. He didn't need to. Because your office door was locked, Kane said. Key with your clerk in her nightdress across town, and because men with rifles were climbing the hotel stairs to collect Vale from his cell. I made a choice. Convenient, Croom smiled. Necessary, Kane said. A chair scraped. Someone hissed back, "Hush up." The courthouse air tightened. You could hear the rope outside move a whisper in the wind. Judge Albee thumped a paperweight. "Order, Deputy Mercer, to the stand." Mercer walked like a man stepping out over thin ice. He swore, voice dry. Croom's questions came smooth as river stones. "Deputy, did you witness Sheriff Kane receive gold from the condemned?" "I saw the pouch," Mercer said. "Vale pressed it on him, said it was for the widow." And every head swung toward Kane, the single word hitting like a thrown bottle, widow. The rumor that Sheriff Kane had taken hush money to keep a bandit's wife quiet. "Your Honor," Kane said, "Vale said a lot in his last hour. He also said he shot that driver for grinning wrong. He lied when breath pleased him. He lied when it hurt. That coin wasn't gift. It was proof." "Proof," Croom echoed, "that you profited." He leaned on the table. "How many pieces are missing, Sheriff?" "Your ledger says 23. The pouch, as inventoried this morning by my office, contains 21. Noise like dry corn rattled the room. Kane didn't blink. He looked at Mercer. Mercer stared at his boots. Kane could see the night in the deputy's shoulders, the heavy quiet of the jail corridor, the moon's thin coin sliding across the cell bars, Mercer's hand sliding too. "Count again," Kane said. Croom lifted the pouch with a little flourish and spilled bright suns across the wood. Dings, scratches, a smear of brown that wasn't dirt on one face. 21 tidy clicks. Counted. Mrs. Pike's pen scratched. The judge's jaw tightened. The room smelled suddenly of sweat and lamp smoke. Kane stood very still. He let the silence draw taut. Then he turned the ledger, opened to the page Vale had signed with a greasy thumbprint, and set it in front of the judge. Vale named names when the sun came up. Left Hand Tom, Finch, Deputy Mercer. It was a bluff. No more than smoke. But the way Mercer flinched told the whole street. Croom's fan stilled. You accuse your own deputy? Kane finally looked at Mercer. I ask him to return 2 coins before I take his hand to find them. Mercer's mouth twitched. His right sleeve bulged, where a small hide bag could rest. The bench nearest him squeaked as a boy shifted his feet. No more than a sound, and Mercer jumped like he'd been shot. Inside the courthouse, courage was a gas that leaked. You saw when it left a man. Mercer took a slow step back. Deputy, Judge Albee said, voice sharpening, you will remain. The door banged. A woman blew in with dust in her hair and a bruise on her cheekbone. Vale's widow, Mara, her eyes bright with grief and a certainty that could pull a gallows down. He said the sheriff took it, she cried, pointing not at Kane, but at Mercer, the little one with the pink hands. He came to my door at dawn and offered me 2 coins if I told folks. The sheriff kept the rest. Said if I didn't, I'd swing beside my man for harboring. The room surged. That true? Someone yelled. A fist hit a bench back. A hat hit the floor. Judge Albee banged his weight again and again. The sound was a gun without a bullet. Silence. Mercer's hand drifted toward his belt. Kane saw the shape of the choice a second before anyone else did. Fight here, with pews tight and women clutched to children, or drag the rot into open air. His badge spun once in his fingers. He heard himself say the line he only used when bridges burned behind him. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. He moved in the same breath. His left hand slammed Mercer's wrist into the table. The right hooked the deputy's collar and levered him across the corner, spilling him and 2 hidden coins that pinged bright against the floorboards. The room inhaled. Mercer panicked. He got 1 boot under him and yanked free his pistol, and the muzzle came up fast, too fast to aim, just fast enough to end a child. When Kane swatted it sideways and fired his Colt once into the plaster to send sound like thunder through every skull present. Gun down, Kane said, quiet enough that silence fell hard. You'll get a rope faster if you lift it again. Mercer's eyes went to Croom, to the judge, to the door. He dropped the iron. The bailiff finally remembered what he was paid for and barreled in with shackles clinking. Iron closed like a snake's mouth. Folks breathed, all at once. Croom found his voice. Mercer's guilt doesn't acquit you, Sheriff. You still took coin. I took it from a saddle to a lockbox, Kane said, and I brought it here. That's the end of it. That, Croom said mildly, is for a jury to say. He tapped a folded paper Kane hadn't seen him palm. Your Honor, the territory moves to suspend Sheriff Kane, pending inquiry. The appearance of impropriety is poison. We must drain it. The judge looked at Kane long, the way men look at another man right before they ask him to kneel. He was weighing fear of the paper, of the town, of his own soul. Then Albee nodded, slow with sorrow he didn't own. Sheriff Kane, surrender your badge and service revolver to this court until such time. As the men who paid for Vale's hands finished their work, Kane said softly, Through the open window, the gallows creaked. On the street, bootsteps gathered where shadows stood inside shadows. He recognized faces he'd seen at the saloon 2 nights back. Finch, Left-Hand Tom, men who smiled without warmth. He tasted metal at the back of his tongue, not from the colt, from the morning. He set his colt on the table. He laid his badge beside it. The metal seemed to dim when it left his skin. "Do you submit?" the judge asked. Kane looked at Mara Vale, at Mrs. Pike's wet eyes behind glass, at the boy in the second pew with his jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. He nodded once. "I submit to the law," he said. He did not say he trusted it. "Good." Croom breathed. He'd already turned to smile toward the door as if someone he'd invited had just arrived. They had. The courthouse doors shoved wide. A sweet chemical tang slid under the oiled wood smell, nitrated cord and sulfur. A man Kane didn't know. Militia coat too new, beard too perfect. Stooped and rolled a small keg across the threshold with the careful delight of a boy delivering a cake. Around the rim, a fuse burned, scribing a hungry blue-white line. The man grinned. "Afternoon, Judge," he said. "Court's adjourned." The fuse spit and chewed toward the belly of the powder keg. Benches scraped. People screamed. Mercer howled in his irons. Kane reached for the table. His badge was 2 feet away and might as well have been in another county. He had the wind, the dust, the breath of the town in his lungs, and one heartbeat to decide whether he dove for the keg, the window, or the woman frozen first row center with her hands clasped white as bone. Kane moved, and the fuse ate on. The fuse hissed like a rattler finding breath. Kane didn't think. He moved. One stride took him past the front pew. The second put the keg between his boots and his hands. He ripped his duster from his shoulders and smothered the blue-white bite of fire, palms burning through cloth. The fuse fought. He pressed harder, felt the heat gnaw the leather of his gloves, smelled sulfur bloom into the room like a storm come inside. The hiss died with a spiteful spit. Silence shattered a beat late. Women screamed. Benches scraped. The militiaman in the new coat blinked, then snatched for his pistol with the righteous surprise of a boy denied his prank. Kane met him halfway and put a left cross across his mouth. Teeth clacked. The man crumpled with his gun still holstered. "Out," Kane barked, voice ringing the rafters. "Everyone out, now." The crowd surged for the doors. Dust rose like an animal and bolted with them. Croom had gone pale behind his slick calm. Judge Albee clutched the edge of the bench like a drowning man and forgot his gavel. Mercer, wrists in iron, stared at the dead fuse and then at Kane, as if seeing a miracle he didn't deserve. Mara Vale made the sign of the cross without looking away from the keg that hadn't taken her. Kane hooked the heavy belly one-handed and heaved, carrying it like a toddler held to keep from harm. He set it behind the desk, under the judge's boots. "Your Honor," he said, breath slow. "You sit over the law. Might as well feel what it's been sitting on." Boot thunder answered from outside, rifles clacking, orders laid neat and quick. The courthouse doors blinked open to a line of mine guards, with brass buttons bright as coins. Luther Voss walked in front, hat in hand, sleeve cuff ragged where the iron had bitten him, court paper in his fist, like a preacher's book. "Ezekiel Kane," he called, voice composed, almost tender. "By writ of Judge Beaumont, you are suspended and under arrest. Lay your hands where your friends can admire them." Behind him, men with company scrip in their pockets flanked the gallows yard. The rope across the street swayed gently, catching a noon breeze like it knew it might be needed. Kane turned to the benches. "Out," he told the last stragglers. "Mercer, with me." He yanked the deputy's chain, pulled him to his feet. Mercer flinched, then squared his shoulders. "Mrs. Vale, keep to the edge. Judge, you want to prove your robe's worth. Walk with the people you aim to govern." Albie swallowed, nodded, stood. He picked up the ledger with trembling fingers and hugged it to his black vest, like a child clutching a hearth-warmed cat. They stepped into the white glare. The square had gathered, shopkeepers, ranch hands, children craning from second-story windows, Lita in her red ribbon, Bain the barkeep, the blacksmith with hands like anvils, Mayor Reed already sweating into his hat. Beaumont himself stood at the foot of the steps, smile oiled, Kane ticking the plank with patient authority. "Sheriff," Beaumont said, savoring the title he was about to deny, "you've stirred enough dust. Place your badge at my feet." Kane lifted the silver star between thumb and forefinger and held it up so the sun burned along its edges. Then he set it, spinning. The tiny star whirred in his palm, a bright coin of duty fought over by two hands, law and justice. He caught it. "I'll set it where it belongs," he said, and walked past Beaumont. He climbed the gallows steps. The crowd inhaled as one. Kane turned to face them. The town square spread under him like a map he could finally read. The rope hung warm against his shoulder. The trap beneath his boots remembered names. "You all saw them try to burn your courthouse," he said. "You saw men with badges buy roots and bullets with company gold. You saw a deputy sell a brother to cover a ledger. You saw a judge sign papers that made daylight look like night." "Allegations," Beaumont sang up, patient, coaxing. "Prove your poetry." Kane raised the pouch. He tugged the rawhide free and poured coin into his palm. He flipped one so it flashed. Eagle, then pickaxe, over K&B. He rubbed it, held up the yellow smear running bright on his skin. "Quicksilver wash," he said. "Dirty gold stamped in a miner's shed. Ask the men whose hands shake when they eat why their fingers shine." He held up a folded scrap. Tilda Ormsby's name, the figure $200, the two words under it, "or else." The ink looked sick in the sun. Mara Vale stepped forward, voice cutting clean. "That runner tried buyin' my mouth. Said the sheriff took more than he brought. He lied with 2 coins and God's name." Lita climbed onto a barrel, ribbon bright as a blood vow. "They meet behind mirrors with candles twin to a whore's prayer," she called. Judge Beaumont's runner bought roots and men, and Luther Voss counted for him with milk on his breath and peppermint on his lies. Voss smiled without teeth. "Sweet talk," he said. He stepped onto the ground beneath the gallows, looking up at Kane like a man admiring carpentry. "You want to finish it here? Good. Hang yourself by opening your mouth." Kane's fingers closed around something small and cold in the pouch's throat. He drew it out. A tin soldier, bent at one knee, oily sheen, same as the coins. He held it where the boy in the second-story window could see, where the women on the steps pressed hands to their mouths, where Voss's eyes had to go. "You made this," Kane said softly. "You had it cast from the same poisoned wash and tucked it where you knew I'd find it. You wanted me to do exactly this, come to this wood, under this rope, because you thought I'd be too angry to mind the drop." The deputy's breath grew thin. "What are you on about?" Kane tossed the soldier. Voss caught it, couldn't help himself, and in that small snatch was confession. "You were in the room where they smelted their lies," Kane said. "You remembered my boy, and thought you could use him to bend my neck." The square held still. Kroom tried his voice. "This is still a court of what?" Kane's eyes cut to him. "Ink?" He pointed to the man with the militia coat, lower lip fat where Kane's fist had found it. "Ask him who paid for the powder. Ask Reed who signed the bill for the lumber under my boots. Ask Beaumont why a private company keeps public order with rifles you paid for." Sound fled. The wind found its way between shirts and along the bead of the bell rope. Someone sobbed, short and ugly. The blacksmith said, not loud, "We're fools," like he'd finally met his own reflection. Voss put one foot on the steps. "Enough. Ezekiel Kane, by writ." Kane drew the Colt, quick as a thought, and leveled it at the rope. He did not aim at Voss. He aimed at the thing between them, the instrument that turned men into lessons. His voice dropped, went iron. "Law ain't always justice," he said, and the town knew the words now like a psalm. "But justice rides with me." He holstered the Colt and reached for the lever. Voss's hand flashed for his pistol. Mercer, iron clanking at his wrists, moved. He threw himself at Voss's legs with all the shame in him and none of the fear, a low tangle that turned Voss's draw into a desperate swing. The gun fired wild. The shot took Beaumont's cane in half and thudded into the courthouse door, splintering oak. The crowd scattered and held all at once. Kane stepped down 2 planks in a breath and wrenched Voss's arm up behind his back, the motion clean as a drill he'd done 1,000 times on men who hadn't sold their oath. "For murder," he said into the deputy's ear, "for roots sold and witnesses buried, for using my dead to bait the living." He shoved Voss forward, under the beam. Beaumont found his voice at last. "You'll be a hangman, not a sheriff." Kane looked down at the silver in his palm. He felt the weight of it as it had felt the weight of him. He set it on the beam, not at Beaumont's feet, not at Voss's, but where the rope's shadow touched it. "I've been both," he said. Some days the badge needed hands too dirty to wear it. He slipped the noose over Voss's head. "Last words?" Kane asked. Voss gave him a smile that thought itself immortal. "You'll swing for this." "Maybe," Kane said. He stepped back and pulled the lever. The trap dropped. Gravity did the rest. The rope jerked, creaked, settled into its slow, awful sway. The town listened to the wood speak and remembered how truth sounds when it has no paper left to write itself on. For a long breath, no one moved. Then Judge Albee, hands trembling, picked up the ledger from the courthouse steps and walked to the base of the gallows. He lay it open on a crate. "Names," he said to the clerk, to the town, to anyone left who could read. "Start here." Mara Vale stepped forward and took the tin soldier from where it had fallen in the dust. She pressed it to Kane's palm. "Give him back to whoever you pray to," she said, "and to yourself." Lita climbed down from the barrel and holstered the derringer with a shaking laugh that wasn't joy. Mercer, still in irons, slumped on the step, eyes on the dead man, then on Kane. "Am I finished?" he asked. Kane looked at the crowd, at the badge, bright as a fallen star on the beam, at the rope cutting a dark line through the hard noon. "Not yet," he said. "Tomorrow we see who else has a ledger to answer." The bell in the courthouse tower, unused for years, moved once in the heat breeze. It didn't ring. It didn't have to. The town had heard enough. The gallows watched him long after the square emptied, an old scaffold with a memory for necks and names. He stood at its base, with the tin soldier hot in his palm, and the badge cold beside it. Justice had ridden with him. He felt it in his bones, in the ache where he'd caught the fuse, and in the burn scabbing his hands. But law was a house with windows anyone could darken, a desk where men wrote in ink that didn't stain their souls. He had pulled a lever on a lawman without a jury's voice in the room. He knew the cost. He knew the taste of being called executioner, and the way a town's pride could turn to fear the first time a judge pointed and found them wanting. He had chosen anyway, because women had been bought with coins washed in poison, because children's futures had been struck into discs and counted like cattle, because a brother had been traded for a smile. He pinned the star back on, not to absolve the hanging, but to carry it. The badge spun slow on his finger, then settled, points aimed true. Law ain't always justice, he said to the quiet wood, but justice rides with me.